afternoon, everyone. Richard Miller here on Never Not Here, and welcome as always. And sometimes I give an introduction and kind of set the stage for what we're talking about, and sometimes I just say, please help me welcome Steve Parker, and then I give the introduction to him. Hi, Steve, and thanks for coming.
Hello. Hi.
I heard about Steve through his book. It's called Heart Attack and Soul. You won't see it too good, but anyhow, it's both a story about healing, and it's also a series of art. You could see, you're not really looking at it, but you can see on every page there's some kind of a artistic image. And so then a lot of times we like to talk about health, but and I found myself talking about cancer and all kinds of health problems. And what happens is I kind of get embarrassed because I didn't really live it on my skin. So then it's all kind of theoretical, it's abstract, it's I heard this, I read that. And, and it just doesn't really, I could just see from talking to somebody that's had cancer, and they'll say, oh yeah, you ought to try it once, And so I really feel tender about talking about health without having such a blessed life myself. I have pretty good health. And I had surgeries when I was a kid, and I had some normal diseases, I suppose, but anyhow, Steve went through a heart attack and soul, so that's really a great and a subject that really can help a lot of people. Everybody's wondering, especially those that are in the midst of it. What is this, and how do I react? And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. So you've done a lot of study on actually what motivates people. In other words, you're a clinical psychologist?
Yes, I'm a clinical psychologist.
And so then you had a great amount of introspection in your own process with all that background.
Yeah, this certainly kind of forced introspection, I think. One didn't do it before, it sort of forced it afterwards.
Is introspection something that comes from fear? Does fear cause us to introspect? I mean, it's not just plain circumstances, right? It must be the circumstances are fearful.
I think difficulties cause us to introspect to a bigger extent than fear, I think. You certainly do some kind of inward search or some way through the difficulty. People also, just in terms of psychological types, from a Carl Jung's point of view, people tend to be either introverted or extroverted. They tend to focus their attention outwardly or inwardly. So there's a basic personality style to begin with that goes along with that.
Introvert doesn't necessarily mean that I'm introspective, though. It just kind of means that I don't go out to the public. But I mean, thought train is running, but maybe it's just circling or cycling or something, or it's not really. It might just be on outward things, but isn't that what introvert means, that I just don't socialize?
Oh, no, not at all. I think introverts can be, in a small group, introverts can be very extroverted, as it were. I think introversion more is that the subject of consciousness are the internal thoughts, sensations, ideas. But it doesn't necessarily mean that one is shy in a small group or that one is withdrawn socially.
So I was misinterpreting that one.
Yeah, and I think it's a general misconception. I think about 75% of the American public is extroverted, and introverts kind of get a hard rap because of that. Extroverts think that that's the way to function.
Yeah, they think that if you're not coming out, then somehow you're embarrassed about yourself, or what's your problem, right?
Yeah, you don't like parties, you don't like to go to public events, so what's obviously something wrong.
Right. So sometimes we try to look at it like, what is the difference between looking out and looking in, and we keep coming back to man as a rational creature. rational. And
Well, that's the misconception too, though.
is it?
Certainly, well, from my point of view, from my experience, I think we're primarily irrational. That the unconscious is a much greater force than we give it credit for.
So to me, when I said rational, it didn't mean like we're all logical and we all follow a pattern. It meant more that we're thinking of ideas. That most of our attention falls on ideas or thoughts, which are structures that are supposedly mirroring some kind of a reality for us, and we're trying to determine the patterns. So then, this rationality that I'm talking about is the abstractness of thought, or abstract.
Well, I think it really is, again, from a Jungian point of view, I think it's very much going to depend on personality type and what your primary function is. I mean, many people's focus can be on their feelings or their sensations. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the ideas. I think if one's a thinking type, that's where the rationality is directed.
Right. Okay. So then feelings. But I mean, in a way, a feeling is tied to a thought or a belief, is it not? I mean, if
not necessarily. I mean, no. There's an old William James thing about am I running because I'm afraid, or am I afraid because I'm running? I mean, I think the again depending on the personality type and the age and so on, you can start with the feelings can be the initial sensation, the initial thing that one experiences before the thought.
I think of some particular hot moments in my life, and a lot of them have to do with justice and injustice, or even when you hear something on the news and you think, oh my God, that was just totally unwarranted and unjust. And so that's a belief. There's a belief in justice that at one time certain classes of people were considered subhuman, and then there was no sorrow about tragedy befalling them.
Well, but I think even if you look at it at an animal level, that even with primates like chimpanzees, I think they have a sense of fairness. I mean, they react when the other animal is, when they're not being treated fairly compared to the other animal, when the other animal is being fed and they're not. I don't think that comes from a belief necessarily, like things aren't fair. They just see it and there's a reaction.
Right. I don't think that would be a belief either with animals. But I mean, maybe, I don't know what their instinct would be. I mean, I didn't really ever hear that there's a certain fairness in the monkey tribe, or I just thought there was a pecking order.
They get real upset when you give one of them food and the other doesn't, and when they perceive it as not fair, they'll get rid of their own food too. I mean, they will throw a tantrum.
Oh, really?
They'd rather not eat than be treated unfairly.
That's a question I like to ask. I mean, are feelings separate from thoughts? And you're saying basically at least sensations or feelings are separate. Is that correct?
In the way I see things, yes. And I mean, again, to take the Jung's typology model, you have feelings and thoughts are opposite functions. I mean, one either feels something or thinks something, and feels in terms of a value, not necessarily an emotion. And then you can also experience a sensation or have an intuition, and those are also opposite functions. So it really depends on how you map the world in your brain, and they're all different ways of mapping the world.
Say that again, or go into that a little deeper about how a sensation and an intuition are opposite.
Well, sensation it has to do with what the facts of something are, what the sort of pure sensations are. Like Jack Webb and Dragnet, just the facts, man. What are the precise, exact facts? What's the color, and so on. The intuition would be what can I do with this sensation? So the sensation would be what the pencil is, and the intuition is, well, how can I use the pencil? Einstein, for instance, I mean, he certainly had the facts at his disposal for his theories, but it was his intuition about them that put things together.
Right. I don't know if it's so easy always to get the facts. I mean, there's some things that have a lot of substance and are here no matter what, and a lot of other things only seem to show up when you really interpret them. Your interpretation gives them life and gives them color. And for me, a sensation is just a movement in the body that I can feel. I wouldn't relate that to, a pure sensation. I wouldn't relate to that, to the fact that I sense a pencil on the table. Or
Well, it can be the facts about something. For instance, engineers tend to be what I call sensation types. An engineer is going to pay attention to, how many cubic feet of water are flowing by per second. What's the volume of water? What's the how much silt is in it, and so on. The facts about the water. And an intuitive type would think, water. You start, reciting poetry about it or something. You can't step in the same river twice type thing. It's a different way of utilizing the information you receive.
what is it, that sets these personality types then? I mean, is that something we're born with, or is that something that we develop early on? Or, I mean, okay, somebody you're saying is outgoing and always looking at I guess for me, outgoing means searching for the meaning, not just taking what's here, but somehow ascribing a meaning to it.
Right, which is partly a feeling function to it. Then, if you just wanted the facts, you wouldn't ascribe a meaning to it. You just want the cold hard facts. But the feeling comes in when you do give a meaning to it. Now, the question is, what is it? How does one become a particular type? I think it's mostly genetic, but certainly one's parents and culture influence it greatly. I mean, I think part of the problem is that really one can be a round peg in a square hole type thing. If you have a personality type that doesn't fit in the culture, in a way the way you're supposed to do things. And I think this all the time we're brought up in ways that don't fit with what our nature is.
That's kind of like a model of education, is to mold the child and prepare them for all the rough knocks in this society. And maybe a child doesn't fit that mold. Is that what you're saying?
Well, particularly if you mold them in a very linear way, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and you don't focus on outdoor activities or on other things that one can do. So there's a whole brand theory of education that has to do with matching the style of education to the personality of the student. I mean, there are many people who do much better like myself, with hands-on experiences. They need to get your hands dirty. They need to touch the thing to understand it. I'm not going to understand it from sitting at a desk.
Yeah, I feel that way myself. I mean, I don't know exactly why. As far as being genetically an introvert, let's say I had an introverted childhood, and I also had some kind of physical traumas or problems or fear situations. Basically, a surgery when I was 7 and another one when I was 11, and it left me with a great feeling of fragility. That I became more introverted, and I was afraid to tussle with the guys and really to get involved in sports, and I was kind of like a watcher. And I don't know if I was genetically that way or if that just happened from those experiences. I mean, I relate that to an experience of extreme health crisis like you describe in your book. Okay, for me at a 7-year-old, that was only appendicitis, but it was kind of extreme for me. And the one at 11 was a kidney problem. And so that's how it happened to me. And that seems to be the effect of it.
Well, I think people in general, and particularly the medical world, underestimates the effect of trauma on the personality development, and how frightening and overwhelming and changing it can be. Particularly for children. I mean, you're 7 years old, you don't understand what anesthesia is or anything else like that. So it can be a very disturbing experience. There's a well-known Jungian analyst, Robert Johnson, who was extremely introverted, but some of that came when he was 11, 12, or 13. If something like a car came and broke both of his legs, he couldn't walk much after that, and that really turned him focusing inward. It really does. Those kind of traumas do that. There is it tends to be kind of it shifts the focus when you're hurt, when you're in pain. And
even with very small things, like I remember when I was 4 or 5, and I was standing out on the parkway by a fire plug, and a German Shepherd with 2 puppies walked down the street on the other side of the street. And the mother came across the street, bit me in the leg, and went back across the street and kept walking, And I was kind of like afraid of dogs for a hell of a long time.
That with good reason. They bite you.
Yeah, for no reason, like I wasn't taunting it or I wasn't even there. She just came over and nipped me.
Right, which is, you talked at the beginning about the that we're rational creatures, but what happens in that is an irrational fear. And you have, for whatever reasons, you end up being afraid of German Shepherds and you even know why, but you still will have the fear. So I think our fears make us that's part of the rational conditioning.
I started saying rational, and rational to me is just meaning like, I don't know. I mean, is a fear built into the body? I guess there are some, because when you start to fall, you can feel, oh, or when you see something coming quick, you duck.
Yeah, I think the fear of snakes, I think, is hardwired into the body.
Snakes, huh?
With good reason. I mean, snakes can kill you, so you better, leap or jump back or scream or something if you see a snake at an irrational level.
But I mean, maybe an infant might just go up to a snake, or not.
I'd suspect they would not.
Because an infant, we feel we have to protect them. They want to touch fire. They want to touch everything. They want to stick everything in their mouth.
Well, they have something like, for infants, they have what's called a visual cliff. I mean, infants are afraid of heights. I mean, if you make a checkerboard floor and have plexiglass over a cliff that drops off, so a child can't hurt himself, it still won't go over that cliff. I mean, it understands that not to crawl in a place where you might fall. So it's an innate survival mechanism. And I'd say snakes are probably the same way.
Yeah, I think I saw something about children and different kind of studies done with, just as you said, with plexiglass and so on, and let them crawl and look and have visual perspectives that actually inhibited their movements. But I mean, for me, it's a fascinating subject. Just what is these things that we're afraid of in our life? And in other words, it motivates us throughout our life, and it seems to be stuck somewhere. And I'm always wondering, well, where's it stuck? I mean, where are we carrying this? Because it's not necessarily here now. There's not a German Shepherd here now. But in my case, I'm not afraid of dogs anymore. But if I was, where is that fear?
Well, I think it probably comes from an early, from conditioning. I mean, that's the whole thing. Part of the thing with heart attacks, maybe even as opposed to cancer, you get chest pain, then you get a heart attack. So anytime after that you get chest pain, you think you're going to die. I mean, and it's a very irrational, deeply ingrained feeling. You can't even know it, but it doesn't change it. So I mean, it's partly that it's what in animal psychology is called one trial learning. You subject any animal to a stimulus that may try to kill it. It will, anytime it gets near that same place, it'll have extreme anxiety. That's part of what the nature of PTSD is about, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is really irrational. I mean, people know that they shouldn't fear something, but they really fear it at a very deep level.
Does anything work as far as therapy for post-traumatic stress? Is anything really proving that it can clear those fears?
I think so much in therapy, it depends on what situation and for who and so on. I think some of the work they're doing with the Vietnam veteran, with the Iraqi veterans, and is with re-exposing them to the stimulus and virtual reality and helping them maintain a relaxed state at the same time. It's a classic desensitization response. I mean, that's the standard way you deal with fears. You train people to maintain a sense of calmness and relaxation in face of the anxiety.
So somehow they breathe through it. They breathe through it. They see it. They're triggered. They don't want to be triggered too much because that'll just crimp them up. But somehow you have to trigger them in order to get back into that state. And then you teach them to, stay with it, breathe through it. It's okay. It's not here. And somehow, it desensitizes. Is that it?
Right. I think if you do it enough times and can stay relaxed, and you can learn that you can manage the anxiety, then it really helps. Now, as I understand it, this is one of the benefits of virtual reality. And they can really, they're not they're talking about the smell of burning rubber or the sound of explosions. I mean, you're really immersed in the actual reality and all the sensations. So that really, that's one of the very beneficial way to approach it.
I suppose that has to be done very carefully, because then the re-traumatization can be happening just as long.
Right, that's a classic problem. Classic problem with trauma. You start talking about trauma and you reactivate it and just leave the channel deeper.
Dig it deeper, right?
Yep.
So then, does the fear of dying through a traumatic heart attack, does that ease up, or does that stay pretty stressful, even with all your knowledge about trauma?
Knowledge didn't help much for me.
Right. I mean, a lot of patients will probably say knowledge is not helping for me either, because some patients seem to be incurable, right? And so then say something about that, knowledge didn't touch it, right?
Well, for me, it was, maybe 10 to 20% of people get what, classic post-traumatic stress disorder from heart attack, which are startle responses and flashbacks and so on. Now, for me, it wasn't just a severe heart attack. It was like 5 years of operations and misdiagnosis and emergencies and so on. So it was a combination of it was finally too much. And so my experience was that I could die at any moment. I was afraid to go to sleep because I could die. I wouldn't wake up. I mean, anything was the fear of mortality was always right, instantly there. I went to a Home Depot and it felt pointless to buy anything because I wouldn't be around. And one of the parts that go with PTSD is it's called a sense of a foreshortened future. So you think you're not going to live very as long. In fact, probably not. In terms of statistics, you're not anyway.
Well, that's an amazing thing, that this foreshortened future, because it's not only an idea. I mean, it's like a dulling sense, right? Like a depression or something like that, or like a senselessness, or it doesn't just come as like, oh yeah, well, I might be dead, so I better not get this. What is that mechanism that gives it, it could you say it's a depression?
Well, I think if you have a sense of a foreshortened future, that's going to be part of a depression, yes. But that's a classic symptom of anyone with post-traumatic stress disorder. You just don't think you're going to live that long. And it's irrational. I mean, you can get all the statistics saying, well, people with this, the average person lives 12 years or whatever. It doesn't change. The knowledge, people are more afraid of, people have flight anxiety, afraid of flying, when the reality is that statistically they're much less likely to die flying than they are driving a car. But we're all afraid of, tend to be more afraid of flying than we are of driving, even though driving is much more dangerous. So it's an irrational experience.
So that attacks as a feeling, right? Like some kind of dizziness or like a wooziness in the pit of the stomach, like like the flight, the takeoff, the landing. I don't know. It must be more.
Well, that's more kind of what's called that's a panic. That's a panic attack. That's extreme anxiety response. Which is also often classic for PTSD, but we're talking something very different with flight anxiety. But we are wired to be anxious as creatures. I mean, there's a evolutionary advantage to being anxious. If you're a zebra at a watering hole and the grass moves, you better run like hell. The chances are that it's just the wind blowing the grass, but if it's not, if it's a tiger, you're dead. So we're really geared to be, if something possibly can hurt us, we better get anxious about it.
Sometimes in humanity or myself are trying to investigate this anxiety, because that's an amazing statement. We're wired to be anxious, and certainly the world is anxious, and but yet the people practice techniques, let's say, to kind of like center themselves, even in the midst of what might be anxiety-producing, meditations and so on. And whether they work or not, I guess they must work for someone. Otherwise, they would have died off the face of the earth. These practices wouldn't be ongoing. So somebody it must work for somebody that they can beat the anxiety game. You know, I've been thinking about that a long time.
Well, I think it's those are very, very useful strategies and techniques. I mean, the basics of biofeedback, which is where you're getting feedback about the state of your system, is that same thing. It's to learn to manage your anxiety so it doesn't get out of hand.
I mean, let's say you're afraid of a heart attack, you know, afraid of a recurrence. And I don't, you can maybe make it more clear, because I remember you had several surgeries about changing stents and stuff, and I don't know if each one was another heart attack or if that was just some kind of preventative maintenance or what.
Well, you know, stents are small wire-like screens that span the artery, so the heart can, you can get blood to the heart. A heart attack is when you don't get there's insufficient blood supply to a muscle, to the heart muscle, to the cardiac muscle, so the heart can't function as well, and it doesn't function. The stent, you get a stent because you're having trouble breathing, you're not getting enough blood, but you're getting enough blood to function. So I had 3 of those because I was getting dizzy, I couldn't breathe very well, and the world was turning gray and so on. But those were different than a heart attack, but they all were. 2 of them were essentially emergencies. I mean, if I hadn't had the stent, I would have not made it. So they would have preceded the major heart attack.
I see.
But so it also gets so, and I think it's under recognized in the medical profession, but you go through enough traumas, you go through enough medical things, and have IVs put in you all the time. I ended up with fear of hospital. I mean, not a fear, but I was anxious when I went near a hospital. I was anxious if I turn on the TV and there was a show about hospitals. I still don't like hospital shows because they remind you of the pain that you've been through. So I mean, it's a classic conditioning thing.
But yet, in a way, you're saying that the way through it many times is to go back in, very carefully go back into the trauma and somehow breathe through it and stay relaxed through it. And so then running away from it, in a way, prolongs it.
Yeah, strangely, I hadn't really thought about it in this way, but I would watch Grey's Anatomy while bicycling intensely. That was about the only way I could. It's a good drama, so I enjoyed the drama, but I didn't like the hospital part of it. But because I had this sort of counter response, because I was not anxious, because I was bicycling hard and on a stationary bicycle, I could handle the experience. But a lot of the problem is that this really happens at a subliminal level. I mean, it happens before you know that it's happening, and you can't get much control over it. I think it was Erich Fromm who suggested, or Viktor Frankl, one of them, who suggested that our freedom is we have about a quarter of a second between stimulus and response to get to make a choice. Once the stimulus happens and once the response is given, once the response is given to the stimulus, then your sense of choice isn't as strong. So you really have a very short time when something happens before you get an immediate instinctual response to it. And this is part of it. There's a lot of what's called mindfulness training these days, where you're sort of trying to watch, you step back and watch things before they affect you, so you don't have an automatic response to them.
Okay, the response starts to come up, but is there the tendency that we just follow the response and go with it? And would there be a possibility that we could just stand back and say, "Oh, that's that response that really is not me," and not even so much noodling it out, but just somehow just recognizing and just saying, "I'm okay without that response," and then not following it. In other words,
what you can do is train people or yourself to go through certain breathing techniques, or press your thumbs to your forefingers, and then learn that relaxes you and so on. You can do a kind of counter conditioning, so that when you start into this anxiety response, you can go back to go in a relaxation response instead by some kind of conditioning. But it's very hard to do it, unless you're trained to do it. It's very hard to. It's like people say, "Well, just relax." When someone tells me to just relax, it never helps. You can't willfully do
it. I guess it's very, very clear whether you're having a heart attack or a pre-heart attack or any kind of health problem, really, that the anxiety about it is
Well, actually,
exacerbating the problem, right? It's really making it worse in every way, right? It never is helpful in any way whatsoever, unless it says, okay, I better get my ass to the hospital. We'll call 911.
well, of course, heart attacks. It's not clear when one is having a heart attack. I mean, half the people who go to emergency rooms aren't having heart attacks; they're having anxiety responses. Even more than half. So it isn't. It's not a clear-cut thing, and it's not the same symptoms for everyone. Now, when you do anxiety, for instance, this is just as a model for it. When you do anxiety in math, a certain low-level anxiety helps you do the math. You can do math because you got homework. If you don't get it done, you get something will happen. But if you get too much anxiety, you can't do complicated problems. So some anxiety is helpful for motivation, but too much anxiety is debilitating.
In one sense, we say that, and a lot of people, many people, most people believe that if there was joy in the house, nothing would get done. But yet, there is also a joy in getting things done. You can really be working as a team and working in the garden and building something out in your workshop and really having a terrific joy about it. And it's not that you just say, oh, I'm joyful, I better go sit on the couch. And I think you can do math problems too and really be into it and maybe really like the way it all kind of interconnects and functions and how it comes out the other end and there's a solution, oh boy. And I'm not so sure that what's said that you have to be whipped. And I mean, the whole world runs on kind of like the carrot and the stick with a heavy emphasis on the stick, right? And
or heavy emphasis of fear of the stick, yes.
Yeah, fear of the stick.
Well, if I think about it geographically, I mean, I live in Alaska. There is a lot of anxiety in the summer that winter's coming. You better get stuff done. Particularly by the time September comes, everyone gets kind of frantic. I mean, if you just relax, you're going to freeze to death. I have a theory that the philosophy developed in Greece partly because it was such a benign climate. They didn't have to think, it wasn't a struggle for survival. But I think anxiety partly comes because we need to do something or something will happen to us.
Yeah, are you in a part of I suppose the days get very, very long at one point, and then nights get very, very long at another point. Or do you actually have total blackness and total all light? Or are you not that far north?
Well, no, we're south of the Arctic Circle by about 100 miles or so. So we get it's light all night now. It's not you can drive without lights on most of through the day and night. In the winter we get about 4 hours of low light. Even in Barrow, which is in the northern part of Alaska, you still have enough light to see by. It's like living in perpetual twilight.
So what does that do to the human? I mean, does that do something to what do they call it, the circadian rhythm, or does that? I mean, from the midsummer to midwinter, your body goes through an enormous change and maybe gets confused. I don't know. I mean, is there a lot of anxiety in Alaska?
There's a lot of drinking in Alaska to cope with, I think. Alaska has twice the amount of people with bipolar illness as normal, and I think some of that is extreme light. Bipolar are strong mood swings. There's also a lot more seasonal affective disorder, where the changes in the circadian rhythm really make things difficult.
Is there any way to counter that, or is that just like a fact of life? Or if you know about it, does it help?
Knowing about it doesn't help at all. Going to Hawaii helps. You can do the strategies that help, but nothing really. I mean, you can reduce it, but it's there.
I used to live in Europe and work in the USA, and I'd go back and forth either every month or every 45 days or sometimes every 60 days. And then that was, in a way, it was like everything had to get done by that pivot point where I had to take my full, everything done at one side had to be ready to go to And it was kind of like stimulating. I mean, I don't think I had a fear of it, but I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying, winter and summer in Alaska. There's a definite pivot point where you better be done by that time.
When they subject rats and animals to jet lag, like you were talking about, they don't live as long. I mean, the sort of interruption of circadian rhythm is a real stress on the system.
So I often talk about anxiety, and I mean, I think you're the first person that told me that actually we're hardwired for anxiety. So this is some bad news. But I mean, it seems like the whole world is running on anxiety, and it's just it's ramping up. It's ramping up. It's ramping up. So then, what's the solution to that? Be anxious about our anxiety? I mean, that's about all we know.
Well, but if the metaphor is hardwiring, you can do software fixes to it. I mean, you can do programs that help reduce that central tendency. And that's what the breathing and meditation and many other techniques are about, or hot tubs, or whatever. There are many ways to deal with the anxiety, but it is basic. I mean, you can breed animals so that they're anxious all the time. It's partly a genetic thing. It's how long. One of the things that happens after trauma is your system gets biased more towards fear. And you see this in children who've been exposed to abuse and neglect and stuff. It's how quickly you can. That's what a startle response is. It's how quickly you respond. That you're ready to be afraid at any moment. And it's really the amount of. I mean, it's oversimplifying, but it's the amount of adrenaline that stays in your system. So you can breed animals so that they don't. You discharge adrenaline, which is the fear, hormone, but don't reuptake it. So you just left in this perpetual state of fear. And we vary in how quickly we get adrenaline out of our system once it's flooded it. Most people take about 20 minutes to get it out. Once you've had a fear, once you've been startled, really afraid, it takes about 20 minutes before your system gets rid of those the hormones.
But with people, it can take years, right? It doesn't really. They never get rid of it. You're saying, right?
Right. Yeah. It's perpetually there, or you're much more likely to get it. Yeah. There's this constant kind of free-floating anxiety.
See, because when on your first example, when you said that hardwired for free, and you said a zebra when the grass moves, and it seems to me that a zebra or gazelle, okay, when they're running away from the lion, they're dead scared and full of, pumped to the gills with adrenaline. But I mean, then when if they get away, or if the lion takes another one down, then they're grazing in the grass and licking themselves, and somehow I think they come out of it pretty quick. And I would say that would be the difference between animals and humans. But you're saying that animals can be trained to always be anxious, but maybe that's because humans are somehow they're interacting with humans. Is that a natural state where?
Well, you can genetically modify. You can train the man genetically modify him to always be anxious. But I mean, I think just because the animal is not running anymore doesn't mean it's not still kind of shaking inside. We don't. I think even for animals, it's not. Once they've had a fear response like that, it's not. They're not instantaneously joyful again.
Yeah, I'm not saying instantaneous, but if you said 20 minutes, that's already a pretty good time, because I don't think in mankind 20 minutes is enough. We stew over things for days, right? And then we keep replaying the pattern because we are.
Yes.
That's what I call rational being. We have this language ability that we can look at the same pictures from memory over and over and over again, and that's what I say we choose to go with it. Where we could say, oh, I've had enough of that thing. I'm really not interested in that anymore. And yet we just say, boom, 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 boom. He did that to me. He did that to me. He shouldn't have done that. And then we do it again and again and again. And I don't know. What's the solution for that one?
Well, I think it's learn to step out of it. But when it's talking about animal responses, when I think about one of my dogs who's a part terrier, so he hears lightning and he hears thunder. I mean, he hears the thunder, and he'll shake for hours.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he's scared, and I mean, it takes a long time, even after the stimulus has gone away. It takes him a long time to settle down.
Yeah, that's interesting. We have a dog too. My brother has one that whenever it thunders a little bit, he's down in the basement.
Right.
Bingo, he's gone. I don't know if he's shaking or not, but he just figures I'll get in the hole there.
Well, yeah, I'm sure. I would say he's scared. I might be anthropomorphizing, but
Right.
I'm sure he's scared.
What was the best thing that you learned, you know, to manage your stress and to manage your, you know, you in a way you've come out of those short, what was it called, short term, you know, when you felt depressed and so
For
on.
shortened future,
Yeah, you and somehow is that just a natural process, or is that somehow an insight that you can share?
it was a long journey, and it's. I mean, I still have a sense of a shortened future. I give myself about a year now. I mean, it's still. I make decisions. Say, well, if I still have about a year to live, would I do this activity? It's gone from a day to a week to longer than that. And I think it's a. I think the biggest switch, and one of the is it ends up having a more spiritual direction. That in the face of imminent death, and it's like there's a statement from the war that there's no atheists in foxholes. I think there may be some, but but in the face of imminent death, it really forced a spiritual direction. So you look at things much more in a different way from that.
So then, spiritual can be also kind of like thoughts of, I don't know, what is the spiritual direction? I mean, just to put words to it and see if we can point at it.
I think in the sense that there's powers much greater than oneself, and that the universe is a very mysterious place. I mean, there's J.S. Haldane said something like, not only is the universe stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. And so I think that one gets a sense of just how kind of amazing and spectacular and mysterious the universe is, and appreciate that. I mean, I've certainly learned to live. Part of what having a cancer or a heart attack or these force you to do is live in some ways, if you can do it, to appreciate the moments, have a larger sense of gratitude towards life, and a loss of entitlement. For weeks after the heart attack, I felt lucky to read, and so I was very great. I was pretty easy to get along with because I was grateful for everything. I was grateful to be alive.
So that's a response that actually subdues anxiety. Subdue sounds very active, but I don't mean that. It just diffuses anxiety, because
I think
somehow the anxiety it comes with a long-term view. It's and somehow just saying I don't even know. It's such a mystery. I don't even know if there's a long-term or what long-term could possibly be. And so then, wow, is this an amazing place? And then that's not really anxious anymore, is it?
I think I haven't thought of it that way, but I think that's a good point. There's this, not strange, but research says that if people keep a gratitude journal, if you think about what you're grateful for at night before you go to sleep, that you sleep about 25% better, that you switch off from all those people that did you wrong, to all those bad things that have happened, to just what you're grateful for. It really switches the framework. And it takes it out of the ego. It takes one, you're not number one anymore. Just you're much more grateful to other people and to life. There's a wonderful Jungian statement that a defeat for the ego is a victory for the self. The ego is our own sort of individual.
Right, and the self means like who you really are.
And the self is even a much larger picture, not just us, but our connection, the whole world in some ways, the collective world.
A victory for the whole.
Yes.
So then, people actually do say that sickness has brought them to a much greater appreciation of life, and somehow got them out of this go pattern. Whatever makes this this tunnel vision that we have to do all these things. That we planned in the future. This doing thing, and somehow by having this sickness and this catastrophe, I was somehow rocked out of that thing, and now I'm actually enjoying my life way more than I ever did ever. And maybe I won't last long, and maybe I will, but somehow the enjoyment is worth it. And then,
it is a wake-up call, and certainly for me, it's really altered who I am and what I think, and I'm sure people say I'm a much better person for it. You still couldn't pay me $1 billion to go through it again, or whatever else. Even in spite of this learning, it's such a, whether having cancer or heart attacks or other illnesses, they're such painful things that even if it helps you awake, you still wouldn't do it. I mean, it's a strange paradox here.
Right. In other words, like many are saying that adversity is somehow a gift. Even though spiritual people or the religious people say it's a gift from God. Because if we were to make our own life and we made it all so cushy and so simple and so smooth, we really wouldn't. Maybe we wouldn't develop at all as human beings. And
I preferred life before part of the problem is that after these things, there's a sense of vulnerability to the world. I mean, that's part of what happens with trauma and PTSD and similar things. Is you're left feeling very vulnerable. You lose the illusion that the world is a safe place, and it's an easier reality to live in when you have the illusion.
Right. I mean, it's better to be in a fantasy land, right? And because, to me, I would say, okay, now I'm more vulnerable, but I would say it's more true. And before I wasn't, you said it exactly, an illusion. I was in an illusion. So then, in an illusion, I was, something could have passed by and knocked my head off because I wasn't really paying attention to the signals in my body, for instance. Because I was living in an illusion, just saying, I'm Superman, give me another beer. And I would kind of prefer to be vulnerable and just to feel things and to feel the value of things and to relate more and be more compassionate to even the planet, even the environment, even whatever's living, or even just the rocks and mountains and landscape. And I think that's what the world needs, basically. I don't know what you mean. Vulnerability is such a funny word because it's associated with hurting. And I'm not so sure vulnerability means hurting. It means more like feeling or letting things in and not just guarding, not blocking things out, with building a big moat and a big shield. And somehow that's been construed to say, well, if something's kind of come in, it'll hurt me. And is that true?
I think vulnerability does have. I mean, it is a wounding. It is a fear of being wounded again, and it is an openness. And I mean, it's kind of a necessary openness. I mean, it can be a helpful openness, but it does leave one vulnerable. I mean, that's the fear. You can be hurt again at any time. The cancer could come back, or you're going to die shortly, or something bad's going to happen. So, I guess I personally would rather live as I am now, but still I wouldn't go. I prefer not to have to go through what I went through to get here.
What about maybe because of this ordeal, you're propelled to investigate what causes heart attacks? I mean, people say it's plaque, and people say it's blockage, and it's scar tissue, and it's somehow a blockage of an artery. But I mean, how that all occurs and whether it's just dietary cholesterol or whether it's cholesterol is somehow needed by the body and it makes it itself. I mean, I don't know these things, but I mean, I suppose there's a ongoing investigation, and then in the same sense, there's probably an ongoing ignorance too, because those people that are invested, those institutions that are invested in doing bypasses want to just keep doing bypasses. And they don't really want to get to the root of it.
Right. The evidence is that stents and and bypasses. I mean, stent is put in an implant in to expand the artery, and bypasses are no more effective than lifestyle changes. Yet, and it's even the medication is as effective as a stent. So if you take the same amount of people and put some of them on statins or other medications associated with recovery from heart disease, and the other half, you put the stents in, and the people on medication do just as well. And yet, when this research came out about 3 years ago, it has not changed the amount of stent operations going on. And they're ignoring the evidence that they don't do much. Because it seems to make sense. Well, gee, if I open up the artery, that's going to make it so there'll be more blood flow. But the reality that they're finding is it's a bit of a different view of what causes heart attacks. It's not so much a blockage in a particular place. It's a rupture of the plaque. So you can have, they don't even know what causes 50% of heart attacks, but when the plaque ruptures, it doesn't mean it has to be even a narrowing in the arteries, but when it ruptures, it's the blockage from the rupture that causes it.
So in other words, the rupture means there's loose plaque floating around in there, and then all of a sudden it packs up in a narrow spot and blocks? Is that what it means, rupture?
Yeah. Yes. That's what the blockage is. Yeah.
In other words, it peels off. It could peel off anywhere. It could be in your liver somewhere, and then it peels off and flows around, and maybe it kills a few of your liver cells too, but that doesn't really, you can exist on the rest of your liver. But when it does that to a part of your heart, that's not survivable.
Right. You can have a blood clot, from the leg. I mean, that's what happens with that's what many dangers are. You can get Carl Jung he broke his leg, and it was a blood clot from his leg essentially that blocked his heart.
Right, and then that can also be a stroke too, right? If it goes up to your brain, then that blood clot kills a part of your brain.
Yes.
But didn't you say a third thing? Because you said statins, and you said stents, and then you said lifestyle changes.
Yes.
So wouldn't that would be really something to look into, right? Or find out what are they talking about lifestyle changes?
Well,
does that mean diets and stuff, or what?
After it's been, I've been dealing with this stuff for 10 years and work with clinically too. Is that lifestyle changes are what absolutely the most important thing. People think if they can take part of the problem with taking pills is once you take a pill, you've taken some action. Well, now I'm dealing with a problem. I'm taking a pill, and so it kind of it's a way of avoiding the hard choices in life and learning to manage and live things differently. But lifestyle changes are more effective than statins or bypass or stents.
Well, that sounds like a huge contribution. If that's part of your book, or I have read the book, so I'm not so sure you talked about lifestyle changes. But maybe that's your next book, or like really what your investigation or your contribution on this whole mess is.
Well, I think my contribution, if anything, is on the psychology of dealing with the trauma and the anxiety and depression of the heart attack. And I'm not a medical doctor, and they have that side covered too well. But for instance, one of the cardiac rehabilitation after a heart attack is everywhere shown to be. It helps. It increases mortality if you go to get an exercise training program several weeks after a heart attack. Well, only 3% of these programs employ psychologists. Yet depression and anxiety, that are also huge risk factors after a heart attack. If you have depression after a heart attack or anxiety, severe depression and severe anxiety increases your risk factor. They're not dealing with the mental part. The medical world is not dealing with the mental part and just the terror of this kind of experience. In the same way, when you were a kid, you had this surgery that I'm sure scared the hell out of you, but they probably didn't do much to help you deal with it.
No, they had nothing. My mom bought me ice cream cone or something like that, but that's about it,
Yes.
But that's amazing. But you're saying like if after a heart attack you have depression and you have fear, trauma, and so on. Of course you do. What do you mean if? It's 100%, isn't it?
Well, surprisingly, no. At least when you measure it, not only about half people get measurable something when you measure it on a depression inventory. I think they're nuts if they're not depressed. I think that's a natural response to being wounded. And that stoicism can, in fact, get in the way. I think that's often the attitude as well. I'm not going to let this affect me. And people go back, half the people who smoking is the biggest risk factor of all in a heart attack. And I think most people who smoke go back to smoking after a heart attack.
So then this is what avoiding this depression and this trauma reaction is probably what happens with stents and statins, because you think, I took the magic bullet. I'm done. That's it, and I don't have to worry.
I think statins may do that. I think stents are. Well, maybe some people stop. That's true. You have the stent. You say, I don't have to worry. Medicine will save me. There's a belief that doctors will save you, and medicine will save you, and it will not.
Say that again, please. And it will not.
No, people think if I can live, I can eat my fries, I can live like I want, and if there's a problem, I will get a stent or I will take medication or I get even a bypass. But it doesn't. It's not so. That's not going to save you. It's not going to save your life to do that.
It's going to cripple you. It's going to cripple you in a major way, right?
Yes.
That's a message that doesn't get out there, you know. It's almost a jolly billboard up there that says we're the best hospital for bypasses, and we can handle you. And it's like,
right,
okay, it's a perfect fix.
Well, you don't want to have a heart attack. You don't want to have a bypass. My favorite doctor out there is Mehmet Oz. He has a show now. He was on Oprah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he's a heart surgeon. He's a cardiac surgeon. But he's gotten, as I understand it, he's gotten tired of doing the surgery on people who just, because of their lifestyles, have to have surgery. I mean, he really pushes alternative medicine, learning, eating right, living right, breathing right.
I don't know if you say you're not a medic, right? So that
I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a clinical psychologist.
Yeah. So then I've talked to medics, and they say, well, it's really hard to do alternative practice because the AMA could actually get your license. I mean, revoke your license in that state. I don't know if it's the AMA. No, it's must be whoever it is, the licensed doctors in each state. They can say you're using unusual practice, and somehow they can even revoke your license, or they can sue you, which costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there's no really insurance that you have to protect yourself. So they can just jump on any one person, and that person will probably fold. In other words, at least they'll stop doing their alternative medicine.
There's something wrong with this, if that's the case. But I would suggest that some of the major hospitals, like the Mayo Clinic and the Presbyterian, the New York Presbyterian, and I would say almost all, and Cleveland, all have now alternative lifestyle programs. I mean, they're teaching yoga, they're teaching breathing, they're teaching nutrition. So that may be the case that you can't only practice alternative medicine, but I think if it's happening a lot more at the more leading institutions. So they recognize that's part of the picture now. In general, it takes society about 20 to 30 years to put research and findings into practice. We tend to be about 20 to 30 years behind what's known. So it's been a while. It'll be a while.
So you mean it takes 20 or 30 years to make major changes?
Yes. Mm-hmm. In cultural views.
Yeah. So then the more we talk about it, the more people might just wake up to it and maybe make wise decisions.
Right. I think that's exactly what your show and work in media is about. It's kind of trying to increase the consciousness here, and this is a kind of an alternative means to do it.
Right. I mean, we can't get on Oprah, so then we just try to kind of parallel a little bit, or like reach 1,000 people instead of 1 million. Right. No, yeah, I took that from I know a guy that, a doctor, and he's got a cancer clinic. And apparently some progressive different doctors or different clinics are together and trying to determine, they have an association. And they're trying to determine how to protect each other to actually do some experimental treatments and to see what, to document them and make some kind of research on it and still not be at risk for being accused of doing not normal procedures. And somehow being together like that, they're hoping that that state licensing boards won't just arbitrarily attack one or the other. And that's how I heard about that.
Right, well, these things, institutions tend to be forces to constrain culture. I mean, they're not forces of change; they're status quo forces. So it's very hard. That's why it's so hard for these to change practice in the mainstream, because it's going to be you can't do something different, or it will be seen as malpractice.
Exactly. So still you're sticking with Alaska, right? And so your circadian rhythm is what it is.
Yes. It's sort of a necessary suffering, I suppose. I mean, it's. I've been there a lot. I mean, it's home, and so there's problems with leaving home when one's roots are there.
Frankly, I've never been to Alaska, so I don't know, but I imagine it's really, really totally majestic place. And
not totally majestic. We have town. I mean, the towns themselves don't look any different than downtown Fairbanks. It's no different than downtown somewhere in Arizona. I mean, it's not the towns themselves are not particularly special. I mean, they're fairly ugly. The major towns in Fairbanks, the towns themselves are fairly uninteresting, but the landscape is spectacular.
That's what. Yeah, right.
And the weather, and there's a lot of interesting people here.
And a lot of interesting people too. So then, what is it? An alternative culture, or somebody that says, "Look, I don't need to just rub elbows with everybody. I just want to kind of like know this greatness of this planet." Somehow.
Well, that's what we call we call end of the roaders. People come there because it's the end of the road. This is about as far as you can go. So they're looking for the end of the road. But I talked to someone last year who had moved out for several years to Iowa and Ohio, and they were in their 70s. They came back here because they said, the most interesting people were in Fairbanks that they knew. And I think that's because it's a certain amount of. I mean, you do have to fight the environment. You do have to be sort of self-determined a bit to survive here. So it filters out many kinds of people.
I lived actually, talking about me a little bit, but I lived in Utah for about 12 years. And I always used to think that was kind of like one of the last frontiers, but I mean, or from Chicago where I am now, I would think, okay, that's how it used to be maybe 25 years ago or something like that. Just simpler, let's say, but the Wild West. But I suppose Alaska's even way more exaggerated than Utah.
I suppose. I mean, it may depend on. I suspect there's a lot. It's a fairly small town. A lot of small towns in the state are small. It's not It's not an urban state. So I suspect a lot of places in Utah are fairly, non-urban.
Correct. Somehow I want to go back and just, really talk about, what kind of guidance can somebody is thinking they're having heart attacks or just had one and is just, coming out of their first shock about it. I mean, is there some kind of, what kind of guidance it could be practical?
It sure helps to talk to people who have been there. There are some support groups online, people who have been through similar things. I think it's important to find people who've been through what you've been through, and talk to see how they're dealing with it, and not to and to make sure that you deal with the emotional side of the heart attack, not just the medical side, taking the drugs and so on, but just getting through the psychological territory. And I think it's still a very people don't do very well with. There's a woman named Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, who teaches compassionate medicine. She went through a number of surgeries herself and was a doctor, but she now is running classes at many universities to teach the early residents, about compassionate medicine, how to putting a heart into medicine. And the story of all the books that I read after what I went through, she's written a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom, and At My Grandfather's Table. They're all bestsellers, but they're really about stories of people going through these things. And it's not so much of what pills to take when you have an illness, but of how what kind of attitude you face it with and take it with. And so, she gives the message of it's not being fixed is different than being healed. I mean, being healed has to do with being whole. after you've had a heart attack, at least the kind I have, there's damage that doesn't go away. It's not something to be fixed, but you can have a wholeness or an attitude that works. That's healing. They run for instance, they run a cancer. Naomi Remen and some other folks at Commonweal run a cancer retreat center several times a year. So where people go for a week and talk. It's not like what medicines do you take, but it's more of how you deal with this life-threatening situation. So I think it's a matter of finding this, maybe finding a support group, finding the people and support to talk about it, and to focus on that. I mean, I'm a great, I said I'm a psychologist. I'm a Jungian psychologist. I work a lot with dreams. I think, and in my own journey, I found, I worked with dreams, and I worked with drawing, even though I never drawn before, and this was, for me, was a way through. So it can be helpful to use a sort of introverted approach to it also. Talk to someone who has that kind of way of thinking about things.
So, in a way, we called it a wake-up call, and so then before we're woken up, there's nothing that's going to help. We're not really going to say, hey, and if you feel at risk for a heart attack, if your relatives had one or something like that, look into lifestyle changes. Good luck, that's never going to happen, right? So then, after the wake-up call, maybe then that's the thing to say, is to say, okay, now you've realized that you're not invulnerable, that maybe you can talk to people and research things and see many ways to handle this. And then your advice is just that lifestyle is what really works. A lifestyle change really works. And other things are maybe temporary fixes, but they're not really a fix.
Yes. Lifestyle covers many different territories, but it's food, it's exercise, it's sleep, it's mental health, stress reduction.
Yeah.
I'd look into Dr. Oz. I think Dr. Oz is probably the most informed person out there, sort of in the mainstream. His work and his way of seeing it.
Well, lifestyle is also backing off of your old way. Somehow backing off and saying, making a different choice. Starts right there, right? In other words, you say, I can't make a choice. I have to do this stuff.
Yeah.
I've got a business to run. I've got kids that count on me. I've got 4 kids in college. I blah, 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 blah. But somehow you have to see your way that there is a choice, and somehow you have to start backing down from that frantic pace, and then seeing what else there is to eat, and enjoying your meals maybe. Start enjoying what you're doing, and not just eating a meal so you can get back to work, wolfing down something. And
yeah, there's a whole difference in attitude towards life. I think that much more approach toward the sacredness of life and the specialness and mysteriousness of it.
Well, I hope we all can approach a different attitude toward life and not even have to have a heart attack to get it motivated to do it. Maybe that would make
I recommend them for everyone, really. I recommend them.
Yeah. It would be a whole different world, I think, that we would be living in. Dr. Stephen Parker, I hope to get up there and to the end of see some more end of the roaders. You've stimulated me like I've never really made it to such a big country.
Yeah, it's a good place.
Thank you very much for your appearance and for speaking with us, and thanks much for writing a very, very stimulating book.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay.